The other thing I wanted to go over, and this is more general, more in tune with basically I think everything we've seen today, is card draw. The role of card draw, especially for new players or budget decks. So why is card draw good? It draws you cards. Duh, right? Helps you find the stuff you need. For those unfamiliar with the concept, it can also provide you with what's called card advantage, where you basically have more stuff than your opponent. Either you end up with a bigger board than them because you've drawn more cards and played them, or you end up with a bigger hand, which will then allow you to play more cards than your opponent over the course of the game. And provided neither of you dies quickly, that usually means you win. But specifically, today we saw a lot of decks that weren't necessarily relying on card advantage, but nevertheless lost because of it. And those are mainly the Swarm decks. But I don't think I saw... We just watched 5 matches of Duelyst, a game with readily available, quite efficient card draw, and I don't think a single additional card was drawn all game, apart from a few cards that cantripped. Like there was a Whispers of the Sands played at one point. 0 Sojourners, 0 Spelljammers, 0 Vellum Scries cast. Nothing. When I play Duelyst, I play a lot of card draw. I draw a ton of extra cards. Like all my aggro decks are just chopped to the gills with card draw. Usually I play Spelljammer and one other Infaction effect for a very aggressive deck. Or a combo deck. What that effect is, it really depends on the deck itself and the mana curve and so on. But for clarity, I play a lot of card draw. And even in my control decks, like if I'm playing Control Lionar, 3 Trinity Oath, get in, because that's how I'm going to win the game. If I'm playing Ziran, I need those Trinity Oaths. I need to make sure I have enough resources to overpower my opponent's resources in a long game. If I'm playing an aggro deck, if I'm playing aggro Argian, I need those Trinity Oaths because I need to make sure I have enough gas, enough stuff to throw at my opponent's face to kill them before they can run me out of resources and stabilize. A few Desolators come back. Desolators are another form of card draw, but only in the sense that they fill up your hand. They don't really help you gain additional cards. They give you life advantage more than anything, which is still very important, but a kind of a different subject. So, why should you put card draw in your deck? Let's focus on Swarm. I kind of talked about this last week. I recommended playing Vellum Scries and stuff, but I want to point out a specific thing that makes it really valuable. Swarm decks in theory, don't care that much about their opponent's removal. They're very fast. You play a lot of small inconsequential creatures. You're not trying to win by trading resources and coming out ahead at the end. You're just trying to get down some Wraithlings plus some payoff and kill your opponent. Nice and fast. The problem is that doesn't work very well. If that worked every time, Swarm would be insanely overpowered and not very much fun to play against. So, counterplay gave us Area of Effect spells, allowing us to remove multiple Wraithlings with one card. This bodes a problem for Swarm decks because a lot of the time you have to commit multiple cards into your opponent's Area of Effect in order to do anything. Like if you just put down some Wraithlings and your opponent has a minion or two in play, because, Duelyst decks play minions, they'll kill your stuff with their minions and their face, because they're all tiny crappy Wraithlings, right? There's just not much point in... And if you hide your Wraithlings far away, they won't do anything. Your opponent could just run away from them and dig for their AoE spell. So you're forced to play proactively with these tiny, crappy, disposable minions, which means in order to get anything done, you need to play lots of them. Usually multiple cards, or reactivating your Bloodborne spell. Most people play Zix in Swarm decks, because it's too cheap. It's 2 bodies for 1 mana. That's very, very efficient, but the problem is it costs you a card. And so you put down 2 or 3 cards worth of stuff. You play your... use your Bloodborne spell, and maybe with a Furiosa to buff them, and then you play Cryptographer, and you try and reset it, and then your opponent goes Plasma Storm. And they kill like 4 cards or 3 cards with 1. And in theory, that doesn't matter. You're not trying to win on card advantage. But now you have like 2 cards in hand. And they still have minions and removal and Plasma Storm and healing and their general in their deck and hand. And you're sitting there with nothing, trying to top deck and going, Wraithling Swarm, cool, I'll play this out. They go, okay, I'll attack it with my creatures. And you're like, oh, okay. Repeat for a couple of turns until you die. And we've seen this. This has described every Swarm game I've watched today, and from what I remember, most of them from last week as well, or last time, where it's like Swarm player plays out a couple of cards worth of stuff. Opponent plays homeostatic rebuke. Swarm player can no longer win the game. Run card draw. Run lots of it. Use it. Keep it in your hand. Don't replace it. Unless you have multiple copies or your hand looks clunky. Like, you need it. Or run a higher curve. If you want to play a slower Swarm deck with less card draw, run minions that your opponent has to put effort into killing, rather than only tiny inconsequential things like Zix, or minions that demand payoff, like Wraithing Swarm, which is basically useless without a Deathwatch effect. You know, if you're going to do that, play Vorpal Reaver, play Reaper of the Nine Moons, play Spectral Revenant, play these big bombs that will almost always do something, even if your opponent has removal. And your opponent has to spend, like, at best they can hope to play one powerful, like a Blood of Air or something, to answer it. Whereas with the Swarm decks we're saying today, opponent, they don't run any minions that don't die to, like, easily available AoE. You know, maybe they run one or two. Like, we did see a Grandmaster Variex and a couple of Thunderhorns in one of them, but mostly, you know, the stuff that is required for the main game plan all just gets swept away by Plasma Storm or Ghost Lightning or whatever. And we've just seen all these games where, like, the opponent just draws their AoE and the Swarm player is dead. So if you're playing Swarm, or if you're playing any aggro deck, we saw this with the Fey deck as well, like, the deck, if it had had a bit more card draw, a bit more ways of maintaining momentum, might have been able to power through. You know, find extra resources, run away to hide from dying while also playing out stuff to force the opponent to react, to try and get in those last few points of damage and buy time for Warbird to close out the game. But instead, the player ended up top decking, or, you know, close to top decking, and just losing to Mercanta Warbeasts because they weren't really able to do anything about them. Much less answer them cleanly while also developing their own threats. But, you know, it's very hard to answer an enemy threat and develop something else. Normally, that takes 2 cards, right? And there's efficient removal that allows us to do that. You can play Punish, Ritual Banishing, Demonic Lure, Phoenix Fire, all sorts of awesome kill spells, Martyrdom, like, there's loads of ways to remove something for not too much mana, and there's plenty of minions that you can play as well. But that's 2 cards. Not every card is Lava Slasher, but in order to win games of Duelyst, you have to do that, right? You have to be able to remove something and develop minions at the same time, because the game is so tempo-y. Which means that when someone has a creature that does do that, right? When they have the Mercantor, the Spectral Revenant, the Lava Slasher, when they have Holy Immolation and clear 2 minions at once, while also dealing face damage. When they have a general that can eat stuff for free, allowing them to kill things for no cards and play new threats at the same time. When they have Lost in the Desert, Thunderhorn, Stars Fury, all sorts of things. You need to come back, right? You can't just hope that your opponent never has it, because they will have it. Some people's decks are nothing but it, right? Like, this is how the Magmar deck works. It's a couple of 2-drops and then a bunch of cards your opponent just hopes you don't have for half the game because they wreck them. And so, as the Swarm player, or as the aggro player, as the tempo player, as the combo player, whatever you're doing, if you're on the receiving end of that stuff, you need to be able to step up. You need to be able to clear their Lava Slasher and hit them in the face and develop a new threat at the same time. And to do that, you got to draw cards. And that's why you should put card draw in your deck. Because even if you're not trying to win the game by having more cards than your opponent, the way the game works and the way it's balanced means that your opponent can still apply that in reverse. If they can answer your threat sufficiently with only 1 or 2 of their own cards, that leaves them massively far ahead, and it leaves them with plenty of room in their hand for extra 2-drops, extra threats, extra healing, extra removal. And so you're top decking while they're making decisions. They've got 5 cards in their hand, they can do whatever they need. Once the game goes a bit longer, they can play 2 spells a turn and you can only play 1. You're going to lose then. So even though you might not mind so much about card advantage, if your opponent gets a 3-for-1 off a Plasma Storm and you don't kill them in the next couple of turns, they're going to win. And it's very hard for you to kill them with only 2 cards in your hand playing a Swarm deck, which is so reliant on setting up synergy, swarming the board with minions, and overwhelming the opponent. In order to do that, effectively, you either need to get really lucky and be really, really fast, which is hard to do reliably, especially in the face of AoE designed specifically to prevent this from dominating the meta, or you got to draw cards. And it doesn't take that much away from your deck. Like, Vellum Scry is a good card. It's reasonably efficient, especially for what it does, especially in the faction it's in. Sojourner is a great card. She affects the board. She takes up space. She helps you contest. She probably draws 2 before she dies. She gets chip damage in. She can trade with stuff. She carries buffs like a champion. Like, it's not too hard to just cut like 6 random cards from your deck, basically, and put those in. But I would recommend cutting situational cards, right? We've seen Grasp of Agony in Swarm today. I don't like that. Stuff like Betrayal, one player was running, like, we probably don't need that. Cut the lower impact cards. Like, you don't need as many copies of Zix as you have, especially when you can draw cards to find more of them. And keep in the stuff that really makes the deck sing, right? Keep in your 3 copies of Deathfire Crescendo, your 3 copies of Bloodtide Priestess, whatever. Or looking at other decks, you know, in the case of the Fey deck earlier, like, keep in your 3 copies of, let's say, Snowpiercer, Chromatic Cold, these important cards. And then you'll have them even more often, and you'll have 2 of them in more games because you're drawing cards. You're digging through your deck. You can find key tools. It makes your replaces better because you don't need them quite as much in order to line up your combos because you have more cards in hand on average all the time. And so your deck will start to tick. And the only cost to playing card draw is that it costs mana and time, right? But if you're the aggressor and your opponent's responding to you, like they play an AoE, that takes their entire turn. They have no stuff in play. Then you go, okay, I'm going to draw some more cards and start redeveloping. And with stuff like Sojourner or Spelljammer, you can draw cards and affect the board at the same time. So yeah, play card draw. If you're a new player, you're looking for budget options, there are plenty of common card draw spells and rare card draw spells. The best ones... Well, let's have a quick look through the collection. Let's see. Sunwisp it's only a cantrip, but it helps you filter through your deck, find the stuff you need. Afterblaze is pretty good. You can get card advantage off this by drawing an extra card, making your minion big and using it to eat something. Fealty is very powerful if we're playing a Swarm deck. Trinity Oath is epic, but it's also one of the best card draw spells in the game, so it's worth saving for. Let's see. Songhai have a lot of cards that can get a little bit of advantage and then cantrip. So Gotatsu, Twin Strike, Killing Edge, these cards are common, and you can use them in aggregate to give your deck a nice draw engine, so your hand is often full. Ornate Hyogi is expensive, but if you can make it work, as in you stick it and then start your next turn with it in play, you can win the game very easily by just drawing a pile of cards, motoring through your deck. Silence First Wish, another solid cantrip that can lead you to card advantage. Dream Shaper, really good for essentially replacing your 2-drops. Like, you can play Metallurgist into this, draw 2 cards. It's like your 2-drops for free. Whisper of the Sands, you can draw a card and then kill something with the Dervishes, giving you card advantage. Divine Spark, it's an option. It's not actually that bad. And stuff like Windstrike, again, it can trade with something and draw a card. Windstrike itself is pretty fragile and slow, but can be worth it. Sphere of Darkness can cycle and ping something. Vellum Scry, really, really good. Obviously, it's better in decks where you have stuff that you can throw away, like Random Wraith things, Zix, Sarlacc the Eternal, anything like that, Gore. But this card is really, really good. It's a true gift to things like Lurking Fear. If you don't want to sacrifice your stuff, there's always Rite of the Undervault, which is much clunkier than it could be. It used to be 5 mana and it was busted. They nerfed it. But Rite is very powerful and very unique. Until the release of Monolithic Vision, there wasn't really anything that did the same thing. For Magma, Embryotic Insight, really efficient, really cheap, really good. Tectonic Spikes, it's symmetrical draw, but you can break that by emptying your hand faster than your opponent or taking advantage of the damage. In fact, Starhorn himself draws cards. Again, if you're emptying your hand faster than them or you're profiting off them drawing cards using things like Decimus, you can break the symmetry of it to your advantage. Seismoid, if you're playing mechs, you can like motor through your deck with this and mill your opponent. Cryogenesis, really nice card advantage spell. Kill something and draw a card. That's very strong. That's a good way of getting back into a value game, as well as being nice removal. Blazehound. Blazehound's a good budget option. It's mostly for aggressive decks, where you can take advantage of the body, and the symmetrical draw benefits you more than your opponent. Sojourner. Sojourner is one of my early recommended crafts for new players. It's really, really good. She doesn't look like much, only 1 power, but she draws 2 cards pretty reliably, takes up space on the board, and you can go nuts with her if you buff her or heal her or anything like that. Spelljammer, probably the most ubiquitous unit in the game. I think this card is, I would guess, is played in more decks than any other. And it's always good. It's better in aggro decks, combo decks, tempo decks, anything where you drawing cards is better than your opponent because you'll be playing them more often or you're digging for something specific. But the fact that you get a 3/5 body and your opponent doesn't, and you get the draw first, so if they kill it, you profited, makes it really strong in all but the slowest decks. For those with money, there's Ruby Rifter. This card is solidly underrated and I really like it. And there's also Necroseer. This card's fine. If you're drafting, chuck this in your deck. It actually works better than you think. But the main ones, the main neutral ones, and probably the best ones to craft, are specifically Sojourner and Spelljammer. Sojourner when you're new. This is the first rare I would encourage people to craft, and probably the only rare I would encourage people to craft for a while. And Spelljammer is the first legendary I'd encourage people to craft for a long way. Crafting legendaries is usually pretty inefficient unless you're a one-faction player or you know exactly what you want and you're sure you're not going to be disappointed. But Spelljammers, you're not going to be disappointed. You can just put them in everything. Like, a lot of these decks have Spelljammers in. And they're always good. So, that wraps that up. In summary, card draw is good because even if you're not trying to win the game by having lots of cards in your hand, your opponent might be, and you need to be able to reload after they get one over on you. AoE and removal and powerful creatures exist, and sometimes you need to be able to spend multiple cards to work through them or to rebuild your board afterwards. And so for all of that, you need to draw cards. Plus, sometimes you just need to find specific things. You need to find your synergy, you need to find your Deathfire crescendos or whatever payoff you have for your Swarm deck, or you need to find Swarm things with a handful of payoff. And card draw helps you do that. And it gives you something to do while your hand is bad. So yes, play card draw. And if you're new, craft Sojourners.